There are things you don't see coming, even when, looking back, all the signs were there. I was 67 years old when my son-in-law told me I was no longer welcome in my own home until I apologized. Not his home. Not a home we shared equally. Mine. The house I had lived in for 31 years, where I had planted the cedar hedge along the back fence, where I had painted the kitchen the color of late afternoon sun, where I had sat with my husband in the final weeks of his life and held his hand until he stopped breathing. My home. And I was being told to leave it. I remember standing in the hallway, the same hallway where my daughter had taken her first steps, where we had hung school photos every September until they ran the entire length of the wall. And I looked at my son-in-law and I thought, I don't know who you are. I thought I did. For 4 years, I thought I did. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's what happens when you've carried something for a long time. It spills out before you've had a chance to arrange it properly. Let me go back to where it started, or where I think it started. You can never really know the beginning of something until it's already over. My husband passed in the spring of 2019. Lung cancer, though he never smoked a day in his life, one of those cruelties that make you stop believing in fairness altogether. We had been married for 42 years. His name was Harold, and he was the quietest man I have ever known, and also the steadiest. After he died, the house felt like a room where someone had turned off the sound. My daughter, Cecily, flew in from Calgary for the service. Her husband, a man named Troy, came with her. They had been married 3 years at that point. I didn't know him well. They had a long-distance courtship and a small wedding I was not asked to help plan. But he had always been polite to me in the way that people are polite to someone they are not sure how to categorize. Cecily stayed for 2 weeks after Harold's funeral. Troy went back to Calgary after 4 days because of work. Those 2 weeks with my daughter were the first time in years we had been truly alone together, and I rediscovered the girl I had raised, funny, sharp, capable of sitting in silence without needing to fill it. We made soup. We went through Harold's things. We cried in the way you cry when you stopped trying to be dignified about it. When she left, she hugged me at the door and said, "Mum, you don't have to do this alone." I didn't know then what that sentence would eventually cost me. It was her idea to move back to Winnipeg. Not my asking. I want to be clear about that because it matters, and because in the months that followed there was a version of events being told that made it sound as though I had begged. I had not begged. Cecily called me in October, 7 months after the funeral, and said that she and Troy had been talking and that they thought it made more sense for them to be closer to me. Troy had been offered a remote position, software something I could never quite keep track, and Cecily's marketing work had always been flexible. They wanted to move home. "We thought we could stay with you," she said, "just to start, while we look for a place." "Of course," I said, because what mother says anything else. They arrived in January with 2 carloads of things and a storage unit already rented 3 blocks away. I had cleared the spare room, bought new bedding, made space in the bathroom cabinet. I had been looking forward to it genuinely. The house had been too quiet for too long, and I truly thought that this was the kind of second chapter that sometimes comes after grief. Something warm, something replenishing. For a while, it was. Cecily and I fell into a rhythm easily. She worked from the 2nd bedroom, and I gave her privacy during the day, and in the evenings we would cook together or watch something on television, and it felt almost normal. Troy was less visible. He kept his own hours, took meals at odd times, spent a great deal of time in the garage which he had begun converting into what he called a home studio, though I was never sure what it was a studio for. He was pleasant enough at first. He called me by my first name, which I had told him was fine, though something in me would have liked it if he'd found a different way. He complimented my cooking when he was there to eat it. He carried heavy things without being asked. But there were small things. Things I noticed and then tried not to notice, because I didn't want to be the kind of mother-in-law who notices small things. He rearranged the living room furniture without asking, not dramatically, Just shifted things a few inches, moved a chair I had always sat in over to the corner near the window where the light was bad. I didn't say anything. I moved my chair back the next day, and he moved it again the day after that, and eventually I stopped moving it back. He had opinions about the thermostat. Ours is an older house with a gas furnace, and I have always kept it at 20 degrees. What my body knows, what Harold and I had agreed on for decades. Troy liked it warmer. Not unreasonable, except that I was paying the hydro bill, which in a Winnipeg winter is not a small thing. I mentioned it once, gently. He said he ran cold and that it was hard to work when his hands were stiff. I turned the thermostat back down. He turned it up again when I went to bed. These are not the things that break you. I know that. They are not dramatic. They are not the kinds of things you can take to a daughter and say, here is the evidence of what is happening. They are the kinds of things that accumulate in your body like sediment, until one day you realize the riverbed has changed and you cannot remember what the water used to look like. Cecily changed too, slowly, or maybe I only noticed slowly, which is a different kind of thing. She started deferring to him in small ways that added up to something larger. If I asked her a question about their plans for the weekend, she would glance at Troy before answering. If I suggested something, a restaurant, a visit to my sister in Brandon, a Sunday drive, she would say she had to check with him first, and then the answer would come back reduced or rescheduled or quietly canceled. There was a way she held herself around him that I recognized, because I had once held myself that way around my own mother-in-law back in the early years, before Harold had drawn a clear line and said, "This is my wife, and she is not a guest in our lives." Harold had done that for me. I wondered who would do it for Cecily. I tried once, carefully. It was a Sunday in early spring, 8 months after they had arrived. Troy was in the garage. Cecily and I were drinking tea at the kitchen table, the way we used to, and I reached over and touched her hand and said, "You seem tired." She looked up. "I'm fine, Mom." "I'm not asking if you're fine," I said. "I'm asking how you are." Something moved across her face. Something I recognized, something that had been there and was being controlled. Then she took her hand back and said, "We're thinking about trying for a baby." I know it probably seems like bad timing, with everything still unsettled, but we've been talking about it a lot. I said all the right things. "Congratulations, I'm happy for you. I'll be here, whatever you need." I did not say, "I am worried about you." I did not say, "I noticed the way you check with him before you speak." I did not say, "I raised you to take up space, and you are making yourself very small." I should have said those things. I know that now. But I was afraid of losing what was left of her. The trouble with the attic started in July. I have a room at the top of the house, not a proper attic, more of a finished loft with a pull-down staircase, where I have kept things for years. Harold's tools, boxed up carefully, my mother's sewing cabinet, old tax files, Christmas decorations, the kind of things you do not know what to do with but cannot yet throw away. Troy wanted to use it as additional storage for the studio equipment he had begun acquiring. I said it wasn't a good time, that there were things up there I hadn't yet sorted through, that Harold had only been gone 2 years and I wasn't ready to move his things without knowing where they would go. Troy said that Harold's tools were just taking up space, that I could donate them, that keeping them wasn't doing anyone any good. I said that was my decision to make. He looked at me in a way I can only describe as patient. The patience of someone who has already decided the outcome and is simply waiting for the other person to catch up. I did not go to the attic again for several days. When I did, there were 2 large plastic bins that had not been there before, pushed into the corner near the eaves, and Harold's toolbox had been moved from its place against the wall to underneath the staircase, where it was half hidden behind a stack of Troy's equipment cases. I stood at the top of the stairs for a long time. I did not touch anything. I went back down and made tea and sat at the kitchen table and looked out at the backyard, at the cedar hedge I had planted the summer after we moved in, and I tried to understand what was happening to my house. I want to be accurate about what came next, because accuracy matters to me more than drama. I am not a dramatic person. I was a school librarian for 26 years. I believe in checking sources. I believe in saying things plainly. What came next was this. I went to Cecily and I told her plainly that I needed Troy to ask before he moved things in my home. That it was not about the storage, that it was about being consulted, that this was still my house. Cecily listened. She nodded. She said she understood. 3 days later, Troy came to find me in the kitchen. He stood in the doorway, not sitting down, not coming all the way in, and he said, "Cecily told me about your conversation." "Good," I said. "I want you to know," he said, "that we have been very patient." I put down the book I was reading. "I'm sorry?" "We've been here a year and a half," he said. "We've been respectful. We've made do with a lot of limitations. But if you're going to make this difficult—" "Make what difficult?" I said. He said that they had been planning to buy the house, that they had talked to a mortgage broker, that they had assumed, based on what Cecily had said, that I was open to selling and moving somewhere smaller, something more appropriate for one person. I had never said that. I had never come close to saying that. I did not know where it had come from, whether Cecily had misrepresented something, or whether a private wish of hers had somehow become a plan without my knowledge, or whether Troy had simply decided it was true because it was convenient. I said, "I have no intention of selling this house. This is my home. I raised my daughter here. My husband died here. I'm not moving." Troy looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "I think we need to have a real family conversation about this." "I think," I said, "that you're standing in my kitchen." He left. I sat with my hands in my lap for a long time. The following weeks were the strangest I can remember. We were all still in the house. We were still eating meals, passing in hallways, saying good morning. But something had calcified. Troy stopped speaking to me directly. He communicated through Cecily, small logistical things, the Wi-Fi password, the recycling schedule, as though I were a landlord he was dealing with through an intermediary. Cecily was miserable. I could see it. She moved through the house with the particular exhaustion of someone caught between two people they love, trying not to make a choice. My neighbor Frances, we had lived next door to each other for 24 years, since her girls were in elementary school, brought over butter tarts one afternoon and sat with me at the kitchen table and listened while I tried to explain it. Frances is practical. She does not dramatize. She said, "Beverly, you need to talk to someone who knows property law." I had not told her his plan about the house. When I did, she set down her butter tart and said, "He can't do that. Your name is the only name on that deed." "I know," I said. "Does he know you know?" "I think," I said, "that he believed I didn't know." Frances looked at me. "Then you need to make sure he finds out." The conversation that ended everything happened on a Tuesday in late October. I remember because it was the first frost of the year, and I had gone out early to cover the rose bushes Harold had planted along the front walk. I came back inside and stamped the cold off my boots, and Troy was standing in the kitchen with a look I had not seen before. Not patient this time, not contained, something harder. He said that they had decided I needed to apologize. I said, "For what?" He said, "For making things difficult, for going through their things, for creating a hostile environment." I had not gone through their things. I said so. He said that was not how Cecily remembered it. I looked past him to the doorway where Cecily was standing. She did not look at me. She was looking at the floor, at her own hands, at some point just past my left shoulder. I tried to catch her eye. She did not let me. I said, "Cecily." She said, "I think it would help, Mum, if you just acknowledge that it's been hard for everyone." That was the moment. Right there. Not Troy's words. Those I had expected, in some part of myself I hadn't wanted to examine. But Cecily's voice, thin and apologetic, asking me to make myself smaller so that the three of us could go on pretending this was a reasonable arrangement. I felt something settled in me. Not anger. I've thought about this many times and it wasn't anger exactly. It was more like clarity. The kind that comes when you've been holding on to something for so long your arms have gone numb, and finally you put it down. I said, I will not be apologizing for anything. Troy said, then you're not welcome in this house until you do. And there it was. I picked up my boots from the mat. I put my coat back on. I picked up my purse from the hook by the door, the same hook Harold had installed in 1994, the same hook I had hung my coat on for 31 years, and I walked out. I sat in my car in the driveway for perhaps 10 minutes. I was not crying, I was not in shock. I was thinking. The house was paid off. Harold and I had made our last mortgage payment in 2011 and celebrated with a bottle of Ontario Riesling and a terrible movie neither of us could remember afterward. The deed was in my name. It had always been in my name, because we had bought it before Harold's business went through some difficult years, and we had been advised by our accountant to structure things that way. It had simply never been changed, and then Harold was sick, and then he was gone. The house was mine. It had always been mine. I drove to Frances's. She made coffee and did not ask me how I was until I had drunk half of it. Then she asked, and I told her. She did not say I told you so. She said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know yet. But I did know. I had known, I think, since I was standing at the top of the attic stairs looking at Harold's toolbox pushed into a corner. I had just not been ready to say it out loud. I called a lawyer the next morning. Not a real estate lawyer. A family lawyer. One who dealt with property disputes, whose number I had gotten from another woman at my book club who had gone through something similar years ago, though her situation had involved a different kind of family and a different kind of loss. Her name was Christine, and she was businesslike and kind in equal measure, which is exactly what you need when you are 67 years old and you have just been told you are not welcome in your own home. She confirmed what I already knew. The house was mine. There was no common law claim, no tenancy agreement, no written arrangement of any kind. They had moved in under an informal understanding and had no legal standing to prevent me from accessing the property or requiring them to leave. She used the word occupants. She said I was within my rights. She also said, you'll need to give them proper notice to vacate. In Manitoba, that's typically 3 months for a family member. Though given the circumstances, we could potentially argue for less. I want to make sure you're doing this properly. I said I wanted to do it properly. She also said, very quietly, sometimes when people are in situations like this, they feel they need to explain themselves to the people they're removing. You don't have to. A written notice is sufficient. I thought about that for a long time. I went back to the house 2 days later, mid-morning, when I knew Troy would be in the garage. I had my key. I let myself in. Cecily was at the kitchen table with her laptop. She looked up when I came in and something moved through her face. Relief, guilt, something complicated that I didn't have time to untangle. I sat down across from her. I did not take off my coat. I need you to know something, I said. She nodded. I love you, I said. I have loved you your entire life, and I will love you when this is over, and however long after that I'm given. That doesn't change. Her eyes filled. She said, Mom. But I need you to also know, I said, that this is my house. It has always been my house, and I have had a lawyer draw up the paperwork. You will receive formal notice this week. I am asking you both to be out by the end of January. She went very still. I'm not angry, I said, and I meant it. I'm tired, and I'm sad, and I miss your father, and I have spent the last year and a half being made to feel like a stranger in my own home by someone who decided that my grief was an inconvenience. I won't keep doing that. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said. No, I said, it wasn't. I stood up. I looked around the kitchen, at the countertops I had chosen, at the curtains I had made, at the small ceramic rooster on the windowsill that had been Harold's mother's, and I thought, I am not losing this. I am still here. When he's gone, I said carefully, if you want to talk, really talk, I'll be here. I'll always be here for you, Cecily, but not like this. I left before she could answer. I did not want to make her choose in the moment. I had learned enough about her marriage to know that moments were dangerous for her. They left on the 15th of January, 2 weeks ahead of schedule. I don't know whose decision that was. I don't know what the conversations were between them after I left. There are things that are not mine to know. Francis helped me air out the house. We opened all the windows even though it was cold, -14, a January morning in Winnipeg, and we let the air move through every room. We put Harold's toolbox back where it belonged. We moved my chair back to where I could sit in it and see the backyard. I found the note Cecily had left on the kitchen table. It was short. It said, "I love you. I'm sorry. I need some time. I understand." I folded it and put it in the drawer where I keep things I am not ready to throw away. It has been 8 months now. Cecily and I have spoken 4 times. Short calls, careful. Like 2 people learning to walk on ice they are not sure will hold. She is still with Troy. I do not ask about that. I am waiting for the call where she is ready to talk about it plainly, and I will be here when it comes. My book club has kept me going more than I would have expected. Francis brings butter tarts more often than anyone needs. My sister came from Brandon for 2 weeks in March, and we went through the last of Harold's things together, finally, and we were all right. The house is quiet again, but it's a different quiet than after Harold died. It's the quiet of a place that is mine, fully, entirely, without negotiation. I did not apologize. I did not need to. There are things you don't see coming, even when the signs are there. But there are also things you build over a lifetime. A sense of yourself, a knowledge of where you belong, and those things, if you are lucky, hold. This house held, I held. That is enough. I think about the hallway a lot. Not the argument, not the paperwork, not even the morning I let myself back into my own house with my own key, but the hallway, the photos along the wall. Cecily at 4, gap-toothed and grinning. Cecily at 12, trying to look serious in her school uniform. All those Septembers, all those ordinary mornings I hadn't known to be grateful for while they were happening. There is something that builds in you over a long life, quietly, without you noticing. A kind of knowing. You learn what is yours and what isn't. You learn the difference between patience and surrender. I spent too many months in that house confusing the two, telling myself that staying quiet was kindness, that making space for Troy's certainty was generosity. It wasn't. It was something closer to fear. Fear of losing Cecily. Fear of being the difficult mother-in-law. Fear of taking up the space that was already undeniably mine. What I understand now is that the choices we make in fear tend to teach other people the wrong things about us. Every time I turned the thermostat back down and then said nothing when Troy turned it up again, I was telling him something. Every time I moved my chair and then stopped moving it back, I was confirming something he had already decided. I was making myself smaller in the hope that smaller would be safe, and what I was actually doing was showing him the edges of what he could take. That's the thing about fairness. It doesn't sustain itself. It has to be understood and then chosen and then held to. Harold understood that. He drew a clear line for me early in our marriage, and he held it, not with anger, not with drama, but with a steady, quiet insistence that this was how things were going to be. I had lived inside that steadiness for 42 years and forgotten somehow that it had to be actively maintained, that it was a practice, not a condition. When I finally sat across from Cecily at that kitchen table, coat still on, and said what needed to be said, I was not angry. That surprised me. I had expected anger. What I felt instead was something more like grief and clarity arriving at the same time, side by side, which is perhaps the truest thing I know how to say about what it means to finally act according to your own conscience after a long time of not doing so. I don't know what Cecily's marriage holds for her. I don't know what she has reasoned her way into or what she will eventually find her way out of. Those are her questions to sit with, and I have learned, finally, that I cannot carry them on her behalf. What I can do is be here. Honestly, openly, without pretending things are fine when they aren't, so that when she is ready, there is something real to come back to. Francis asked me once, a few weeks after Troy and Cecily left, whether I had any regrets. I sat with that question for a while before I answered. I said, I regret the months I spent shrinking. I don't regret a single thing I did once I stopped. The house is mine. It always was. That is not a small thing.